Welcome to Commissioner's Corner for March of 2021. So I always forget the name of the show because it got changed on me at one point and I've never embraced it. I'm sorry. I am joined by your County Commissioner, Tamara Pogue. We're doing, again, a physically distanced show, and we're going to do segments with each individual commissioner. So we're going to start off with Tamara, and so thanks for coming today. First thing we wanted to talk about was economic resiliency. We are taping on the 15th of March today, and tomorrow we've got a work session where we're going to bring in the Summit Prosperity Initiative, the Chamber, a bunch of other town and other partners to talk about this topic. And so I know this is something that's you're very passionate about. So why don't you talk a little bit about what we can expect at our work session tomorrow?
Yeah, this is definitely one of my highest priorities. You know, my background was working in human services, and so I saw firsthand the sort of struggles that affect our whole community, really not just our workforce, because so many of our jobs are in one industry. So what happens in a community like ours when you don't have a lot of diversification underneath your economic base is when something like COVID happens where some industries, and in this case, in COVID's case, it's like our industries, they're hit disproportionately hard. And that really impacts our workforce. It impacts our employers. Everything from soup to nuts really get affected. And so one of my goals as commissioner is to take a look at that base and to see if there are some ways that we can start to build around it. Industries that really complement our ski industry, certainly, but industries that may pay a little bit more, may provide maybe not the same strain on housing, for example, as our tourism industry does. And I think COVID actually presents us with a really good opportunity to start having this conversation. I've seen and I've heard from a lot of business owners who have told me that if we were to open up to 100% capacity right now, they wouldn't be able to find the workforce they need. We've certainly seen some fluctuations in our school district enrollment and housing, where it used to be, housing was just expensive, but you could find housing. Now no one can find housing. And so I think all these issues are connected. And we need to look at ourselves coming out of COVID and say, all right, what can we do to create an economic base that is a little more diverse and a little more sustainable? And so that is the conversation I'm hoping we're going to start tomorrow and then continue on Wednesday night. And it really does affect every sort of piece and sector of our community. So it's important to have stakeholders at the table, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Great. Well, we look forward to that. Again, we've got Summit Prosperity Initiative. They've done a study. Yeah. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that study or what they were looking for as part of that study?
Summit Prosperity Initiative was sort of a special initiative that was hosted at the Chamber. The Chamber got a READY grant from, I think it was the USDA, and that allowed them to bring in some technical consultants that have expertise in looking at various different economic infrastructures. They looked at what surrounding counties are doing, different counties that sort of have infrastructure in place. And they were tasked with making some recommendations about what kind of an infrastructure would really support this work. So different counties do this different ways. In some places, you have a separate organization that's really running the efforts. In some places, like for example with the town of Silverthorne, they have the infrastructure to make some of these changes embedded within their local government. In some places, it's purely a business-led endeavor. And so they looked at all those models, they looked at what we had in Summit County, and they've made some preliminary recommendations. And it was a fairly small group that's been working on this study. And so I think part of what we also want to start doing tomorrow is broadening the conversation, getting some other folks in the table that maybe weren't involved in putting this study together. And then the first step really is to say, all right, what is an infrastructure that we have or don't have in Summit County that might be able to move the needle? The other big piece that they looked at was workforce development. Obviously, we have a great entrepreneurial community in Summit County. A lot of folks start their own businesses. And so what can we do as a community to really support the growth of that workforce in particular? Because a lot of those, what I'd call entrepreneurial sector jobs, tend to pay a lot more than what we would see across the tourism industry as a whole. So that was another piece of what they looked at, is how to better support our sort of emerging business community.
Great. Well, I look forward to that. Of course, we do all of those work session meetings on Zoom, and so folks can can take a look at that. If you happen to be checking in on our work sessions, that's one session that you might want to tune in for.
Yep, and also the town hall. We would love for folks to participate in the town hall, which is 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And you can find the information about that event on the chamber website, I believe.
And is that something that's recorded on Facebook or available?
I think that is a Facebook Live / Zoom event.
So that should be something that people can look at after the fact.
That's right.
Because they may or may not be watching this before
That's right.
then.
And
So
then I
perfect.
think we've said, but this particular BOCC is really focused on getting input from our community. So I hope folks will take a minute to watch it and share with us what they think.
Great, great. Another thing that you have been very involved with, we sometimes call this the silly season. That's when our legislature is in session. And so I know you've taken a very active role in testifying on a couple of different bills. And why don't you talk a little bit, just give us a little bit of a legislative update at the state level.
I think just big picture, sometimes some of the legislators show up in Denver and they want to represent their constituency really well. And that's great, and that's what they should do. The problem is we have a lot of diversity from county to county. And so sometimes it's easy to make decisions, for the legislature to make decisions on behalf of, let's say, Denver, that really would negatively impact a community like ours. And so, I certainly pay close attention to the legislature because part of my job as a commissioner is to advocate on behalf of our community. And there are a lot of decisions, funding, programmatic, that get made during the silly season. And we want to make sure that those are made in a way that really helps Summit County rather than hurts Summit County. So there's a few in particular that I have paid close attention to. Obviously, healthcare has long been a passion of mine, and there's two big healthcare bills this session. One is the proposed creation of a public option, which would basically, the idea is that for counties like ours, where we've been really proactive about solving this problem, it would create some incentives for carriers and hospitals to keep partnering with Peak, for example. But for counties that have not had that kind of success, it would also create an infrastructure to provide some lower premiums. So that's one healthcare bill. The second one is the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. This is a strategy that they started in Maryland and that we're trying to replicate here. But it basically provides transparency around prescription drug prices. So large employers, like us, for example, could look at how much we're paying for drugs and how much we should be paying for drugs and then negotiate. And so some estimates right now show that prescription drugs make up as much as 40% of the healthcare dollar. It's a big piece of money that we do not have a lot of data around. So my hope is that if this legislation passes, it would give us a lot more transparency. There are some really important behavioral health bills up this session. There's sort of what I'm calling a behavioral health stimulus package. I'm sure there's a more formal name, but I think there's a recognition in the legislature that coming out of COVID, there's going to be huge demand in the mental health field. And so this is trying to create some additional funding and some additional infrastructure to help communities like ours meet that need. There's also a co-responder bill, which is sponsored by Representative McCluskey, and that basically creates more funding for programs like ours, the SMART team, which creates crisis response to severe behavioral health challenges. There's a secure transport bill, which would basically make it easier for partners to bill Medicaid and provide sort of law enforcement transportation for folks that need to get moved into a hospital bed, for example. So that's another important one. There's an important housing one called inclusionary zoning. This is sort of a strategy that we've used in Summit County for a long time, and there have been some legal battles around whether or not you can do it, but this really encourages developers to come to the table to partner with us to build affordable housing. So that's been another one that I'm focused on. I think those are the major ones.
Great.
There's some really big wildfire ones that will have a big impact on Summit County. Commissioner Lawrence has sort of taken the lead on those. And, there's all kinds of other fun things like residential zoning and things that most of us don't typically know a lot about.
Yep. As you said, important for us as a community to keep our eyes on those things because oftentimes there are unintended consequences to some of this legislation. And so making sure that we're engaged, that the commissioners are actively involved is really important. So thanks for doing that on the ones that you mentioned and the others as well, which we certainly keep an eye out for. And we have some other organizations that we work with, Colorado Counties, Inc., CCAT, which is
Colorado
County Commissioners Acting Together,
Yes.
and other advocacy groups that we work with to try and keep an eye on it. Because they're all of a sudden, this year in particular, there was these weird delays around the legislative session, and so instead of some bills sort of trickling in at the beginning, there were like 200 of them that dropped all at once, and so that's a lot to research and keep an eye on. So thank you for everything you've been doing there.
Well, I'm happy to do it, and I will say sort of the unintended benefit is you get to work with commissioners from a lot of other counties, and I have certainly learned a lot from those folks.
Great.
Thus far this session. So it's an interesting process, and I think it will make a difference for Summit County.
Excellent. All right, so we are going to stop there. Thanks again, Commissioner, for joining, and we will have Commissioner Blanchard up next in our second segment. So thanks very much.
Thanks.